Hello everybody. Today I want to talk about food sensitivities. So what is a food sensitivity and what does it mean for your health? So a food sensitivity is something that is very different from an allergy or a true allergy. When we think of a true allergy, we think of a emergency situation. The way I remember this is a true allergy is mediated by the immunoglobulin E pathways in our immune system. So I think of E for emergency. These types of allergies, these emergency allergies, are things that need to be treated like emergencies. So they're not the place for treating naturally. You need to get them down quickly because a lot of the times they lead to an emergency response in our lungs, and ultimately that can be very dangerous. The other side of allergies is the IgG mediated immune system. So this is a flip side. This is what I like to call a general immune response, but it's not as severe as the IgE response. This could be a food sensitivity. Now, we don't have an immediate symptom of these IgG responses. These often produce very vague, very different symptoms than what we classically see in the IgE. Uh, IgE responses could be anything from shortness of breath, difficulties in breathing, digestive upset, and complete loss of digestive function for a period of time. Basically, an anaphylactic response, narrowing of the airways, those kind of things. The IgE produces these very unusual symptoms. So they'll produce sometimes some classic symptoms. They'll produce some gas, bloating, irritable bowel syndrome like symptoms. They may produce other things, though, on top of that. So they may produce memory problems. They may produce behavioral difficulties in children. They may be producing skin problems. They may produce changes in mood, depression, anxiety. So they're very, very general, and can be very vague. And what also complicates things is these IgG responses often can build up into the body and be asymptomatic for a while. But as their levels go up into the body, you get to a point where it's like filling a glass of water. Eventually, when you get to the top of that glass, they start to spill out, and that's when you get symptoms. So you may be a day or so from the time you are exposed to food before you actually get the symptoms. Now that makes it very hard for you to go back and determine what caused it. So a lot of people don't really know what causes it, and it gets to be very challenging. So essentially we can call these hidden food sensitivities because we might eat them one day and then maybe 4 hours later we get some upset tummy, gas and bloating, or maybe a day later and you get anxiety, low mood, depression, memory problems, brain fog, all these things that can occur. So what do we do when we have these problems? Well, what we do is we ultimately want to look for the source of the problem and remove it. So if we can find the foods that are causing the problem, then we remove those from the diet for a period of time. We can also look inside our microbiome in our digestive system and determine if there is any bacterial byproducts or bad bacteria that are leading to a leaky gut, and then really kill those bacteria and support the gut lining. And when you do that, you can rebuild your gut lining, filter only the smallest food particles go through the gut lining and prevent any large particles going through the gut lining, resulting in this IgG mediated immune response. So essentially treating the gut, treating inflammation, treating leaky gut is essential to long-term recovery, and also, removing the food. What is also particularly interesting is, remember that glass half full, or the glass full of water, and as it fills up, and you get symptoms. Well, we find that you may not have to go off these foods forever. And that's another major difference between that emergency allergies and these food sensitivities, is that you can with emergency allergies, you have to stay away from the food for the most part. We just stay away from the foods. If we get exposure, we take some sort of medication to kind of get that anaphylactic response down. With food sensitivities, you're not going to have an emergency situation, so you can eat these foods once in a while. And the more you're away from these foods, the less reactive you'll get to them. So it may be about cycling these foods in and out of your diet, and that may be enough to get the symptoms down and allow you to eat this food again once in a while. What's extremely important for our bodies is to have a diversity of food. And sometimes I think, sometimes we get used to eating the same things over and over again because it's part of our being convenient, and we get into habits. And that in itself can be detrimental and lead to these food sensitivities as well. Just not enough variation in your diet. So changing up your diet, rotating in certain foods, rotating out of certain foods, ultimately can really go a long way with managing the food sensitivities. So how do we find food sensitivities? Well, as it turns out, there's not really a proper test for this, because it's not as simple as running a test and finding a diagnosis. It's very difficult to actually diagnose these. One of the easiest ways is to just do an elimination diet. Take all the common food sensitivities out. They may be things like citrus, they may be wheat, they may be soy. And you take those out for a period of time, see how you do. If you are fine and the sensitivities are still there, you then go back and you take out other food sources, another maybe 3 or 4 foods that you think are causing you problems. Now, the issue with this technique is that it's very time consuming, and it requires a lot of back and forth with some sort of a dietitian or a naturopathic doctor. So a lot of visits back and forth. And eventually you can find a majority of food sensitivities that way. But there's some other techniques that we found to be very valuable. And one of those techniques is what we'll call electrodermal testing. That's one of the test techniques we use in our office. It's otherwise known as Vega testing. And we find that to be one of our more effective ways to find, or our most effective way to find these hidden food sensitivities. There are blood tests, and you can take a small portion of blood, and we either get that from taking a poke of your finger, dropping a few drops onto a pad of filter paper and sending that to the lab, or taking actually blood from your body and sending that to the lab. That is going to find whether or not there's the IgE antibodies attacking a food particle, and if there are a lot of these IgE and G antibodies attacking a food particle, then we can remove that food, and the food sensitivities may arise. So that's the very basics of the difference between a food sensitivity and a true allergy.